Hello and welcome to Life Beyond the Numbers, the podcast for those curious about creating a more fulfilling work life. Every business boils down to two basics, people and money. Here we focus on the human side. Numbers matter, but people matter most, and people drive performance. I'm Ní Chríodáin, your host, a coach, consultant, facilitator and author of Leading Beyond the Numbers. It brings me joy to speak to people and explore together how, although we share many similarities as humans, each of us navigates the world through our own unique lens. This adds intricacy to our interactions and contributes to both the depth and difficulties of interpersonal relationships. Join us for stories, strategies, and insights to help you lead your life beyond the numbers. Hello and welcome to episode 208 of Life Beyond the Numbers. This episode is going out on September 1st, 2025. And believe it or not, on September 1st, 2020 is when the first episodes of Life Beyond the Numbers were released. So today is the 5th anniversary of the podcast. And it's also the launch of my audiobook version of Leading Beyond the Numbers. So I decided to do a special celebratory episode sharing 5 reflections from the last 5 years, as well as a short interview that was recorded at the end of the 2 days I spent immersed in recording the audiobook version of Leading Beyond the Numbers. This episode is called Beyond the Words. When I was reflecting today, I realised that hosting this podcast is just like facilitation. And I was curious. I knew to facilitate what was from the French facile, easy. And I decided I would look up the etymology of the word. And it goes back to the 1600s. And it means to make easy, to render less difficult, something that's easy to do. And that's exactly what this podcast is about. Firstly, I do my best to make it easy for guests to participate. When they do, for them to open up and to enjoy our conversation. And then it's easy for me too. This is a way that I show up and speak that feels natural. It's a fabulous way of using my voice. And of course, there's work involved. Sometimes it's been a bit of a pain, to be fair, but mostly this podcast is easy and I've treated it with ease. It's been effortless, a joy. People have told me after listening to certain episodes that they can imagine from listening what it must be like to work with me. It's almost, they say, like an experience of being in a coaching session. Or they get a sense of my facilitation style. And this makes sense, really, when you think about it, because that's what I do. I hold space for individuals or groups to hear themselves. I listen. I really listen. And oftentimes people get to say the things that they've left unsaid. or at times things they didn't even know they wanted to say. The most surprising thing isn't just one thing. That's probably not going to surprise you. I know I often ask questions that are multi-part even. But after 207 episodes, I'm delighted to say that I still get surprised. I get surprised by people's willingness to share, to open up, to go anywhere that the conversation takes us. And I'm surprised by what guests have left me with. In particular, Anna Haslock from episode 68 stands out as one of the most bravest people I have spoken to, who spoke about grief and loss and injustice with just such dignity and humility and bravery. And there have been phrases that guests have used over time that often come to mind, like, do we grow when we're in balance? Are you appropriately selfish? Imagination is one of our most underused resources. Availability is not a skill. And most recently, from the last episode, in fact, we don't eat nutrients, we eat stories. And these lines they're not just good lines, they're nuggets of truth or wisdom to store and recall when the time is right. I didn't expect how the conversations would stay alive beyond the recording. And I've made some friends doing these recordings. I've met people who I'd never spoken to before, who I still meet up with in person or have coffee with. And lovely Suzanne Evans, who introduced me to wonderful David Lee, the three of us continue our conversations well beyond the first recording. I was surprised when people said no. I was surprised. The very first no I got, I was really surprised. And I remember going back to that person saying, obviously I have to respect your decision, and I get it. It's not for everyone. And I firmly believe each to our own. None of us need to be doing things we don't want to do. So I still get the odd no, and it's gotten easier over time. And there was one episode that I recorded that never aired because the conversation just didn't flow. The guest and I knew each other, were familiar with one another, have amazing conversations, but for whatever reason on that day it didn't work. And so it never got published. In fact, I destroyed it so that it never would. And the guest asked me to. It wasn't just me, it was the guest. There are some episodes that have gone out that of course could have been better. I could have asked different questions. They could have gone in a different way. But for the most part, the episodes, they speak for themselves. And this one said, I don't want to be aired. So I guess the surprise about all of this for me, or the surprising thing about all of this, is it's not just about creating content. It's about creating connection. It's about timing. It's about trust and openness. And it's about real people having real conversations. Conversations that matter. And when I was writing my book, Leading Beyond the Numbers, I knew that certain podcast episodes would feature in the book. I knew some of that in advance of putting the first word on the page, and some other episodes came to me as I wrote, particularly words that the guests had left with me. But it was probably way back at episode 10, unbelievably, that I first really got a sense of what my book was going to be about. And now the audiobook is finished and available. I recorded it a couple of months ago in Norfolk here in the UK, and reading it aloud almost 2 years after writing it really helped me remember the power of voice and how much that matters. And in the interview that I'm playing at the end of this segment, Rob Lawrence is posing the questions, and Rob asked me some questions, you'll hear it in my voice, that I wasn't expecting. But not only was I not expecting the questions, I really wasn't expecting the answers that emerged. And that's the beauty of voice as well. Sometimes you know what to say, you just didn't know you knew. But before I get on to that, I just want to say I'm not done. I often reflect on whether or not to continue with the podcast. And sometimes that reflection is because of the numbers. And then I remind myself that this is about life beyond the numbers. I pause, smile, and just let it settle that this podcast brings me so much joy. It's one of the most fulfilling things I've done in my work life. And there's more to explore, more to say in voice, in writing, in leadership, in how we live and lead beyond the numbers. And I want to keep listening. I want to keep asking the questions and keep discovering what's ready to be said. That's why this podcast still matters to me. So thank you for listening to my 5 reflections on this 5th anniversary of Life Beyond the Numbers. And just before we go to the interview done by Rob Lawrence, I wanted to let you know that I am now writing on a platform called Substack. And I'm making life a bit easier, there's that word again, going forward by rotating between the podcast airing and the Substack piece being published. And published in the sense of just putting it out there. From September onwards, so from this month onwards, the podcast will go out on the 14th and the 28th of the month. So 2 podcast episodes every month on the 14th and on the 28th. And then on the 7th and the 21st, I will have a piece on Substack. And if you want to explore my Substack, I'll leave a link in the show notes to what I call it over there, the whole equation. And of course, listeners, it comes down to you as well. I do this podcast because people let me know that they get something from it. And that's like the icing on the cake because I love it, and it brings me even more joy to know that listeners love certain episodes too. And if there is a topic you'd like me to have an episode on, or a guest you'd love to hear in conversation with me, let me know. I'm always open to suggestions. So until September 14th, I'm handing you over to Rob Lawrence and me, recorded back in June.
So, Susan, you've just finished recording your book in audio form, Leading Beyond the Numbers, here at JMS Studios in the heart of Norfolk. How's the experience been for you?
Quite surreal.
Right.
It feels like I've been locked away for a couple of days.
You have been.
But in a good way.
Yeah.
It's been a bubble.
Yeah.
And so the whole thing is such an experience and gave me such a different flavour of my book. Hearing the words aloud, having people witness that as I spoke them, and not having to think about anything else while I'm here except this. And not having to be aware of the technology or anything because somebody else is managing all of that.
Yeah. How has your relationship to the book changed from this experience?
I think I've fallen back in love with it again. It's nearly 2 years. No, well, it is nearly 2 years since I wrote it. And it's just over a year since it was published. And I guess it kind of goes a bit like up and down, the relationship to it. But speaking it aloud, I found myself almost remarking on parts that I just hadn't thought about or had kind of completely slipped from my mind, going, I need to go back to that and I need to do something with it. Because I guess it's a jumping off point as well, perhaps to more writing and more exploring. And also, it's a reminder to get the book out there more, to put it in front of more people. Because listening to it, listening to me saying it aloud and reading it again, gives me that sense that it can do a lot for people. And I really appreciated that more as I read it aloud.
What have been some of the challenges reading or doing the audio version of the book?
The first, I suppose, is when you sit down to write, or when I sat down to write, I never thought about reading it aloud. And it is quite a different experience, especially when it comes to alliteration and P's and C's and sentences, and you start tripping over a sentence length or this beautiful use of language that I don't know comes out the same spoken as it does written, because we tend to speak differently than we write. But one thing I think I was lucky was that I did write the book in more of a conversational style. So I think it lent itself then to becoming an audiobook and to being able to speak it. Listening to the sound of your own voice for a couple of hours it was fine. I'm used to it because I do a podcast and I'm always talking, I suppose. But you're really faced with yourself when it's your voice and your words, and there's no escaping from that.
Yeah, yeah. And what inspired you to write the book initially?
I've done a lot of things in my life. I have a lot of different experiences from the places I've worked and where I've lived and all of that. And I wanted somewhere to capture some of those in a way that I wish I had access to some of the knowledge and experience I have now when I was younger. And not even necessarily when I was younger, but maybe when I was up against challenges in my work life, that if I had been able to go to a mentor for or reflect on other people's experiences, it may have given me a little bit more of a clue that I wasn't alone. I didn't need to go through things alone, and that there were things that my body and my brain could help me with. And I think that a lot of books that are out there are about one thing, like sleep or emotions or organizational culture or whatever. And I wanted more of a reference book where I could dip in and out of different things and then follow the ones that really made the most sense to me. So, for example, if you're interested in knowing more about your nervous system or your heart or your gut or how your brain works or all of these different elements that are in the book, you have license to go and do that because it's there from the further resources and all of that. But actually, to kind of get a holistic picture of everything, there aren't many books that I've found that give you that. And that was one of the main drivers for me of bringing that book out.
Yeah. One of the things that stood out for me about your book is your lived experience. You've got quite a number of stories in there. And so it's quite a personal book in that respect.
It is. And that was quite a struggle at the beginning because I was thinking to myself, will anyone want to listen to what I have to say? Does my experience even really matter? Because you normalise your own experience. And I remember right in the early days of writing, I probably hadn't really written anything, but I was procrastinating lots. I was in the supermarket and I was listening to a podcast, and I can remember still where I was, like I stopped dead because the person was saying, if you write about your own experience, no one can argue with that. And it wasn't so much that it couldn't be disputed or anything, but it was like, it's my experience. And actually, I found then during the writing process, being able to put myself into the story or use my experience as a jumping off point made it so much easier to then open up to what else I had to say or what else I would think about. So yes, at times it's quite personal. And I even think that came across in reading because there were a few times where I felt my voice go a little bit, shake a little bit or whatever, because I guess it is very personal. However, there's something better about hearing people's real life stories than just listening to studies. And we need both. And that's what I aimed for, to have a mix of both, not just the research, but bring the research to life with practical experience.
Yeah. What's been the most rewarding aspect of writing and reading the book so far?
These aren't small questions, Rob, that you're asking me.
Deliberately.
I think the writing, it's one of those human endeavours. They say that every one of us has a book in us. And I firmly believe that. And I believe anyone can sit down and write a book. Maybe not sit down and write a book, but, that there is a book in us that we can get out of us. And it's like anything that you challenge you give yourself, whether it's running a marathon, writing a book, learning how to walk, whatever it is, all of these things, once you conquer it, you're like, wow, I did that. I can do that. And there's something really life-affirming about setting a challenge for ourselves and then accomplishing it. And also, it's funny because the beginning of the process is hard. And you'll do anything else, literally anything else except sit down and write. And then you get into the writing, or I did. I certainly started to get into the writing, and I really immersed myself for a couple of months in not doing much else apart from writing. And by the end, I didn't want to stop. I kind of got into this so much, this way of life, and things were starting to open up more. And I can remember in chapter 8, there's a piece about a corporate body, and I turn it into a metaphor. And when I wrote that, which was one of the last pieces I wrote, I was just like, wow, things are really starting to fire and connect. I feel like I'm only getting started, but I was right at the end. Of course, I haven't really written since, not much. And that's what happens as well. And from the reading part of it, putting myself in the listeners as opposed to readers' ears rather than eyes is a different experience, because how we read off a page and how we listen, I think they're different.
Yeah.
And sometimes I would read a sentence and realise that just doesn't, I've done nothing for that sentence. I need to bring life back into it. And thankfully, I had Keith sitting out here who was keeping an eye on all of that and would so politely stop me and ask me to reread a part if he felt I hadn't brought that to life. And that just made the whole thing so much better. I mean, that is an incredible way to do something, because if I had been here alone, who knows what you'd be listening to.
Yeah. And I've certainly enjoyed being in the control room with Keith and reading the book along, listening to you share your book in your own voice, which has been a wonderful experience. And I imagine there are authors out there thinking about perhaps reading their own book into an audiobook format. So you've chosen to come up all the way from Oxfordshire to Norfolk. How's that experience been for you, and why did you make that choice?
It's all thanks to you, Rob. No, luckily you and I had worked together, and when I thought about doing the audiobook first, I reached out to you because I thought, of all people, you're going to have some idea of where to get started. And did I ever know I was going to come to Norfolk for the first time to record an audiobook in a studio? No. But that's been part of the fun, because it's made it an experience in its own right to be able to leave Oxford behind, get on a train, because that's how I travelled up here, and then just spend a couple of days in the countryside. I'm staying in this lovely hotel, the Park Farm Hotel, right beside the recording studios, where it's just been like, I haven't known anything else was going on in the world for these 2 days. The world may no longer be here, and I don't know. And that is brilliant, because it meant I lived and breathed my own work for the couple of days, and I had the right support around me, which makes all the difference.
Yeah.
Because, like I said earlier in some reading, that it's not a solitary endeavour bringing a book out, and an audio book is no different. It's not me on my own just reading. There are other people involved. Does every book lend itself to being an audiobook? I don't know. I think that's up to every author probably to decide for themselves. But there's a lot to be said for you being the narrator as well as the author, because no one will ever say it in your words, in your way.
Yeah. And you mentioned earlier, it's quite an isolating experience, and you mentioned being in a bubble. But how's that experience been for you on the whole?
I think I said to you at the end of yesterday, I was exhausted. And I am a bit today as well, but I'm also energised and kind of exhilarated. I've been sitting here, I don't know, what has it taken us? Maybe 10 hours over 2 days of sitting and reading. But it's been incredible, and I'm so glad that I've done it. Yeah. Actually, I really, really am. And what was fascinating to me was when I would leave, I'm in a little room on my own most of the time, and then Keith and you, Rob, were sitting outside in this other room, and I would go back outside after finishing a couple of chapters to take a break, and I could hear my own voice as Keith did a bit of a playback, and the sound quality, like I was like, wow, I sound great. And that's everything as well, because a lot of us don't like the sound of our own voices, and you have to get over that, I think, to really enjoy yourself as well. And you do that by listening to your own voice endlessly, especially if you do podcasts. And you quickly get over that. But there's something about hearing it when the sound has been done professionally that's just a whole other way of listening and hearing your own voice.
Yeah. Well, congratulations on writing the book, recording the book. And what would you say you've learned about yourself during this experience? It's a very coachy question there to ask you.
I suppose I've learned that there's a lot more that hasn't been said. And a lot of the book is about voice and not leaving things unsaid and speaking our truth and using our voice. And I sometimes realise that I don't use my voice as much as I could. And I can retreat from things that maybe it would be better if I said something, not for the sake of saying it, but saying the thing that is just bubbling under the surface. And in a way, that's what writing the book does. It brings the things to the surface that wouldn't necessarily come through otherwise. So I don't think that's done. I'm not saying I'm getting on to write another book or anything. I just think there's a lot of creativity still waiting to emerge. Whatever form that takes, we'll see.
Yeah.
That doesn't really matter. Reaffirming to myself that I have this capability and capacity is important.
Yeah.
That's why I'm even forcing myself to say this now on a recording with a video as well. There's no escaping that. And I think as humans, certainly for myself, that's my experience, is I need to remind myself of that.
Yeah.
I can take it for granted, I can ignore it, and actually reminding myself helps me to do the next thing, take the next step, no matter how small.
Yeah. And talking of next steps, the book's been nominated for an award. So very exciting. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yes. So the book was entered into the Business Book Awards here in the UK. And I found out in April that it was shortlisted in the leadership category along with 9 other books. And the award ceremony is in September. So there's a couple of months to go to find out. We're just in early June as we're recording this.
Yeah.
And that's so exciting, and it gives another platform for me to talk about the book from. And not only that, I found out I'd been on holidays last month, and when I came back, I found out that I'd become a finalist in the Indie New Generation Book Awards. And that was in the health and well-being section rather than business or leadership.
Yeah.
And my book is primarily a business book for leaders. So you might wonder why in the health and wellness category, and why did it actually get recognised in that category as well? And I think it's simply because the book is about bringing your whole self, your whole person to work. And that includes whether you're in a good state of health or not. So I was really, really delighted to see that it got recognised in a health and wellness category, because it matters. The organisational health matters, and the health of individuals in an organisation matters.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
That's great. Well done. And congratulations on that.
Thank you.
And finally, where can people learn more about you, Susan, and your new book and the audiobook?
So the audiobook, we might have to wait for that one a bit, but I guess it's going to be available wherever you get your audiobooks. That's certainly the plan. Like the book is available on Amazon and anywhere else, any of the local bookshops, I'm sure, that are near you. You can go in and ask them to order a copy, because it's being distributed nationally, internationally even when I go into my small town at home where I grew up, Dingle. I was there recently, and they had only one copy left, they told me, and they were ordering more in the next day.
Wow. There you go.
And I got to sign the book in my own local bookshop. So yes, you can buy the book pretty much anywhere you want to buy it. And me, you can find me on LinkedIn, Susan Ní Chríodáin. There's only one. And you can also have a listen to my podcast, Life Beyond the Numbers.
Yeah.
And my website is beyond-thenumbers.com.
Okay. Great. Thank you. And one more question. What's next?
I was hoping you weren't going to ask that one. I think what's next is what's now.
Yeah.
And there's always something happening. You know, that's life, isn't it? And at the moment, I'm focused more on client work, and that's what's happening at the moment.
Right.
So what's next is what comes out of now. That's all I'm going to say.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Susan, well done, and thank you.
Thank you, Rob. And thanks to JMS Studios. It's just been brilliant.
Thank you for joining me today on Life Beyond the Numbers. If something in this episode resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you've enjoyed this conversation, please take a moment to leave a review. It helps others like us discover this podcast and join in our conversation. Until next time, keep exploring the human side of work life.